Yeah, I'm Lewis Wertz. I'm the communications director for the Western Landowners Alliance. Been with WLA for 5 years plus now. I live in Wheat Ridge, just west of Denver, Colorado. And if you don't know WLA, we are landowner-led, West-wide organization founded in 2012 that works to advance policies and practices to sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. And so that means working in collaboration all the time. That's one of the pillars of the way that we work. And we work on, so we have a wildlife program, water program, basically, and they have fun names. Working Wild Challenge. The water program is actually just called the Water Program right now. And then a forest and range program that we also sometimes call our Working Lands program, although Working Lands is at the heart of everything we do. And this guide we'll be talking about today, as Matt will tell you in more detail, comes out of that wildlife program. But I think a lot of the way that we approach choosing our words and communicating across divides and to different audiences with sensitivity is something that applies broadly to whatever natural resource issue you are trying to collaborate on. So we apply these same ideas and in all of that work, just haven't produced a public guide for those other issue areas. One for water would be fascinating though. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. So I'm Matthew Collins. I'm the Working Wild Challenge manager. And what does Working Wild Challenge mean? So I help support producers who are working all over the West, and working in close proximity to large carnivores and also elk. And these species are really revered by a lot of folks in the United States and the world, but on working lands, they can cause some real challenges. So of course, grizzly bears and wolves can kill livestock. Elk can challenge livestock for feed and cause a lot of impact, both economic and so for carnivores that can cause real emotional impact when you have conflicts too, and also those indirect losses of livestock when they're stressed by their presence. And so this is something that we help to reduce those direct conflicts, but really in the system over managing that situation, there is a ton of disagreement, ton of conflict between people over how to manage those conflicts, how to manage shared spaces where livestock and carnivores exist. And that's really where we work at the nexus of. We try and find radical center solutions to bring people from all walks of life together, to have kind of hard conversations and figure out solutions to this really persistent problem. You all probably work in all different spaces, forestry, bird conservancy, bird conservation, or water, which are all kind of have their multifaceted kind of deals to them. But we've figured out a process that's worked kind of well for us. And really that's lifting up the voices of folks who are experiencing these challenges, being landowners, livestock producers, and then connecting them with agencies, connecting them with other folks, NGOs, researchers, who may have some funding or may have opportunity to be part of those solutions. And so that's what we did. We facilitate a group called the Conflict Reduction Consortium. And it really just brings together, yeah, those same stakeholders and in the spirit of open collaboration to have these hard conversations and build solutions. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can just go to the website that I linked in the chat. But one of the groups in the CRC a while ago were talking about, gosh, real challenge in this space is the rural urban divide. A misunderstanding amongst folks on how to communicate, how to come to solutions to these predator conflicts that are based out of like a real rift in experience in our country. And and sometimes you have people from more urban backgrounds going into rural communities and coming in with solutions and trying to talk about them in a very certain way. And then all of a sudden, folks just get turned off. They're like, nope, I don't want to work with that person. And why does that happen? What's going on? What's the trigger there? And so we tried to investigate that and figure out, kind of in both directions, what words are really sensitive, what words need more context. And really from that group, had a discussion, really just pretty loose, free form at first, and then getting more and more focused. And it kind of informed this guide I'll share my screen real quick. Um, and um, really just an introduction and then jumps right into it on some of the sensitive words. And then just suggested terms. We're not saying don't use these things. It's just if you use them, just know the context. So we have some suggestions for some, and then just context, and then perspectives from urban and rural audiences about these words and where there could be some sensitivities. And so one thing that comes up a lot in our space is the word coexistence. And this is one of those words that to a producer was a little bit of a turnoff and a conversation ender. Just for some background, I have a background in social science. It's something that I feel comfortable with. This is a word that was kind of developed by wildlife advocacy groups and researchers, and it really talks about the same thing that producers are pretty comfortable with, like living and working with wildlife and trying to figure out solutions. But that just saying coexistence, it doesn't feel like the producer's word. It doesn't feel like something that they feel a part of. And so opening up conversations with that word sometimes put folks on the back seat and are like, okay, this is a little not quite my scene. And so that's something we highlighted pretty early on. And so yeah, if you can check out this document on your own time. But it's pretty specific to the sphere of carnivore livestock conflict. But something that might ring true for some other folks is the word education. Sometimes I think in a lot of conservation work, it's like, okay, we just need to educate people. We just need to get information to folks, and then they'll learn and they'll change, and then everything will be better. But a lot of times, those folks who were like conservation groups are looking to educate have a ton of knowledge and a ton of know-how in their landscapes, generations of knowledge for being out on the land or running operations. And it's just trying to, and so we kind of move towards like shared understanding or learning. How do you figure out how to share different types of knowledge, understand each other? And I think that's something that can go across a lot of different spheres of conservation and these challenges is figure out opportunities for shared learning versus just being like, oh, I have the solution. I'm going to give that solution to you and you better listen. I'm going to educate you and then you better do it. And that's been something that's been a nuance that I think has really helped our work because it's a really polarized space. Trust is hard to come by, and really listening and figuring out solutions together and then building on those, I think is really helped us be effective. And it really just starts in that grounded space of like, we're sharing knowledge. We're not educating here. We're figuring this out together. Yeah. And so we're just keeping this pretty darn informal. That's basically it for just our mini presentation. But I think just Lewis and I are happy to take any questions right off the bat from what we shared, and then we want to kind of hear from you all. We have some questions for you all. But yeah, just any questions right off the bat for what this is or the process.
Yeah, Matt and Lewis, I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit more about your methodology and kind of the process that you went through to kind of discover those words that were kind of at odd with the goal and trying to find those other words that would maybe help make things a little bit more easier to
Yeah.
find a common ground.
Matt,
Yeah.
you want to talk about how the social
Totally.
subcommittee and then the drafting committee or the drafting subgroup worked on
Yeah.
this? Yeah.
So it started in an in-person meeting, and basically it's just listening like, okay, what are people's focuses here? Like what do people want to work on? And kind of a group formed like, okay, we need to work on this rural to urban divide. We need to figure out ways to bridge this. And then I think it came up in that conversation like, okay, there's these words that are kind of bugging me. And so what did is just brainstorm them. What words come up? What are things that feel divisive or people just like want to talk through? Just made a big old list. And so that's what happened in person.
And
Then
why don't I just back up for the group's sake to help people understand like who's in the room and who was in the room in that conversation and what sort of interest groups are they representing?
I think in any of the work that you're doing, if you're trying to do a collaborative process, doing like a stakeholder analysis, figuring out all those folks who are affecting or affected by a resource concern. And so we did that, and it was livestock producers, state and federal, wildlife management agency representatives, folks who are wildlife advocacy group, represent those, also researchers, and then some tribal representatives as well. And so having all those folks in one room having these conversations at that time was like pretty novel. And then kind of digging into some of these topics was a way to just kind of shoot the group off in a direction. And so yeah, I think having all those different folks and different backgrounds in the same place helps kind of cross pollinate and get these conversations going so you can get these ideas all in one place at the same time. But yeah, it's a process to even get that going, as I'm sure many of you know.
Yeah, and I will also say that like the other thing that was valuable about the process here is that as Matt is on our program side, I'm on the comm side. We had some communication staff from organizations or agencies who joined those conversations, but also, and importantly, people who were regularly interacting with those stakeholders and could, like on their program side, or who are ranchers, who are engaging with agency personnel or NGO staff or bear or wolf researchers regularly, so that they had a real like lived experience of having of being triggered, basically. If you think about like these, some of what we're and we tried to really ask people to get into those, to like to look back at those conversations, like what dead ends a conversation for you with somebody who is well-meaning and wants to work with you. And most of these people who are all of the people who show up regularly to the conflict reduction consortium are people who are committed to collaboration in this space and recognize that there are challenges and often have to overcome their own trigger, like, are fairly practiced in overcoming their own being triggered. But so maybe that makes them a little bit more able to recognize, like, when does something sound off to me, but I have to think, oh, I know where that person's coming from. So it was a good group to do this with in that regard too, because every time we met, they were practicing this sort of behaviors that the guide was meant to share. So we had a couple of this in-person brainstorming session, and then we took it to the bigger group, which Matt can get into, through like regular virtual convenings.
Yep. And then every month, this group met for about 6 months, and we took all those words that were kind of populated during that in-person meeting, add them to a Google document that was pretty coarse, and then started to build out some of those sensitivities from both rural and urban perspectives. And then we kind of kept hashing it out. This was then distributed to a smaller group of folks who was more dedicated and probably had more time. There's one person for wildlife advocacy group, one producer, and one representative agency who just had more time to be able to hone this in a little bit more. And so we worked with that kind of smaller drafting committee to write this and that introduction, and then work with Lewis and the comms team to make it all pretty and make it in the form that is today. And got it all, got consensus from the group that they feel like it's something they want to put out there in the world. So all in all, this is probably over a year to get from idea to implementation, which I think going slow to go fast is always a good thing. Because once, I can get a lot more backing into a product. But yeah, Julie, see you have your hand up.
I have two questions. The first, you partially answered with that you had multiple meetings with these stakeholders. I was just curious kind of what your messaging, your invitation was to get them in the room to begin with. Of course, it might be a little easier to get like the researchers or the agency people, but like if you're getting landowners and stuff part of the conversation, how did you frame that messaging to get them to be part of this? And then my second question is, now that it's out in the world, what's been the perception? Like what's the feedback that you're receiving from folks? Do they agree with it? Do they think there's terminology missing? Do they disagree with it? What's that look like?
No, those are good questions. I think I'll tackle the second one first, and then you can tell people about the how the CRC came together and how we got these people engaged in this. we get feedback irregularly. It's always nice to get feedback, whether it's good or bad. And I wish we got more, to be honest. When the guide first came out, we actually did have like, you know, a pretty robust discussion. So that drafting committee was a subset of folks, and there was a lot of back and forth about like what makes word sensitive and how to balance the rural and urban there. And so we felt like we had done a really good job, and then we gave it to the big group to review, and we got a lot of feedback there that like there were still things that were missing, and there was just not, and we recognized on both sides. So it was kind of like, I think the feedback has generally been that from your own issue area, some of the or from your perspective, some surprise that these words were that I use all the time, or that I don't think have any tone, like have a like set people off, would be considered that way. That was initially a lot of feedback. And then some suggestions have come in for words we've missed, but we aren't planning to update the guide. It's just a thought. I think we'll just be frank about that. Like I would prefer, I think, to spend the energy to try to do it with some of our other groups where it actually provided a way to deepen that our inspection into like what are, you know, how are other people coming at these problems, and what were, you know, like that as part of the overall process for the group, I think was really at a critical time of its formation. Matt may, as the master's in social science and human wildlife conflict reduction, probably has better insight into how this fits into the process broadly, and like whether it's repeatable or actually kind of checks a box that researchers have identified for how to go about this. But it felt pretty critical at that moment to have a conversation with this big group that we had convened about how words matter, how our word choice matters, and how we ought to think about talking to each other, and to try to be intentional about that. And so it emerged from that process. And so and then we hope that it can be helpful to other groups that are trying to do that kind of work, maybe not specifically on large carnivore conflict, but maybe specifically on large carnivore conflict reduction. There's like small groups that are working on that in the Southwest with Mexican gray wolves, or in North Carolina with with wolves, or with bears in other parts of the country. So that idea is kind of what we hope that it serves as a catalyst for thinking about thinking about these things for groups that are forming. And then, yeah, Matt, like maybe the background on how the CRC came together would be helpful in terms of thinking, also in terms of explaining why the guide came about in the time frame that it did.
Yeah. So that group started first from, I guess, Western Landowners Alliance has been working with producers and landowners for a good time, and I think some level of trust with those communities who are affected by that challenge, I think is helpful. And so it kind of started from one big meeting in person, where kind of near your neck of the woods, it was east of Bozeman, where it was held, and then one other near Cody, Wyoming, where it just sounded like a real need, that there wasn't a lot of coordination. People were looking to have some more conversations across these different groups, and just felt like it was a real opportunity and a real need. And so that was, gosh, that was 6 or 7 years ago now. That was before, I think, either of our time at WLA.
Just
And then
before me.
yeah, I think just before you, and then about a year and a half, 2 years before me. And then Alex Few, my predecessor, she now runs a land trust in Powell and Cody, Wyoming. She's an amazing person, and she's the one who brought together that group initially. And what I put in the chat is a roadmap to place-based collaboration. And it provides like a step-by-step process to forming collaborative groups. And I think this is more for like place-based or like in a specific location, but I think a lot of those steps hold true to a process for forming like one of these bigger Zoom-based conversations, but doing a stakeholder analysis, figuring out who are the best people to represent, who has like power and interest in that system, and who should be involved in those conversations so they can represent their communities well. but I think it's really just figuring out who those people are, having some level of trust where people are interested in coming to the table, and then yeah, framing it in a way that people feel comfortable in joining a conversation. And I think just starting slow and but then building towards a product quickly so people can feel like they have a shared win and yeah, gain excitement and trust in that process. But anyway, that's what I studied for my master's, is how form place-based collaborative groups form. And so that's, yeah, kind of my thing, I guess.
We got to turn Matt's master's thesis into a practical guide, which not everybody's master's thesis becomes, so that's awesome. And I would also I would emphasize that, like, sometimes it can seem, and actually I think it always seems like when you're bringing a group like this together, that the personalities are so key, right? Like Alex was really, really good at, used to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, or maybe the other way around.
Wildlife Services.
Yeah, Wildlife Services. She came from an agency background where she had been interfacing regularly with livestock producers dealing with conflicts. But not everyone from that background can overcome hesitancy by livestock producers to engage in a group. And then she was also able to bring in folks from wildlife advocacy organizations in a way that, but I think a lot of what we were trying to do with this messaging guide, and then with a lot of the other stuff, the place-based collaboration guide, was to try to get away from what help people get over the idea that it's just a personal alchemy thing that has to happen, and that you couldn't possibly try different things and have better results. And so that's part of what this guide is about. It's like, actually, if we poll this group and we try to bring together like some of the ideas about like how we use words, to how we communicate with each other, we can be the better people that we think are always key to catalyzing these successful collaboratives. So that's where the guide, that's part of what the guide is about, is to get people to think about that, because I think that's one of the geniuses of people who are really good at this, is that they are constantly thinking about, how am I talking to this person so that they stay engaged. And if you don't make that part of your practice, then you're not going to be particularly successful at collaborative conservation.
Louis, I'm wondering how you guys took this information and worked it into your own communications at WLA.
It was really this was a cool project to be involved in throughout that process of developing it, because it meant that I felt like I internalized a lot of these things without needing to read the guide. I just heard from people regularly that about which terms. So, and at the time that we were doing this, there was just me and one other person on our comms team, so it felt really pretty easy to build a culture of these are the words we use, these are the words we avoid, and so and now, I mean, we it's required reading for everyone who joins the comms team, and again, I think it's less about these are words we don't use, there's some sort of list of taboos, and more about, we have to be conscious all the time of our own internal biases, and the way the way we might assume that this word isn't going to set someone off, but we should interrogate that more than you think, probably. And I found that as we bring new people into the comms team, we've added 3 people since then, and had some turnover, so recruited people. That has been a really useful thing to just prompt that conversation. Okay, I know, as part of onboarding into this organization, as part of coming into this space from being a journalist, or being a working in marketing and partnerships for a recreation company, or in the recreation industry or something like that, you have your own set of terms that you feel like everyone understands the same way, and we have to be conscious of that, and ask the question, how are the people that we're talking to going to receive this, not just how does it sound to me. And so it has been useful that way, for sure.
I have a question for you guys, and I don't mean this to be anything, but I'm just curious. Th- have you found this to be sort of a two-way street? Like, are the landowners that you work with, have they looked at this and started to change how they're speaking to folks that are coming, from agencies or other
Yeah.
conservation groups and working with them? Because it seems like, this group is on the conservation side and adjusting, rightfully so, our language to speak better, to landowners that we might be working with. I'm wondering if the reverse if you've seen that at all.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's we can like point to this guide as the main thing that's caused that, but we've been running this collaborative group for a long time, and like these types of conversations and conversations across folks who may not get along at face value, like it takes time and practice to have them. And yeah, I've seen people be able to navigate some pretty challenging things, and folks who really don't agree on a lot of things just be able to focus on the things that they do agree on. And some of that is using same language. So like lethal control, like killing carnivores in response to chronic depredations is something that's really divisive in this space. And it's interesting to see some different folks who have different perspectives about that be able to talk or avoid that topic so they can work on things that they do agree on. Or yeah, and so I think it's more just a way of communicating and a way of just focusing on things that you can agree on. And then some of the language I've seen used a little bit more, or some language used less. But yeah, I think fundamentally this guide, I think it has one thing we got feedback on as we are making it from some of the wildlife advocacy groups. I was maybe a little more focused on helping wildlife advocacy and conservation groups be able to connect more with producers and agriculture groups, and might be a little more focused in that direction than versus the other. But yeah, I think overall it's like the overall process has helped people connect a little bit better. So it's not really, I can't say
Yeah.
that the document really did that directly, but
I would say like one of the things, this is an example that I don't want to use any names for this, but there are producers and wildlife advocates in parts of Montana with very intense grizzly bear conflict that I am like just incredibly impressed, and I think that Matt's work and Alex's work and Eric Kalsta, our current Working Wild Challenge director, and everyone who is working and there's a whole bunch of people outside of WLA who co-facilitate now and are involved in leadership in the collaborative. Being conscious of this explicitly with the group has helped those people build relationships that you just never would have, like it was impossible to imagine that they would be friends, let alone or talk to each other civilly, really, outside of the times we required it of them in those meetings. Now and yet they are, and I think it's really it's pretty cool to see that. And obviously, like Matt said, you can't attribute it just to the guide, but I think the intention of the guide is an encapsulation of the way that we went about the bringing the collaborative together, and so from the producer side, like the producer in that equation is like growing into a kind of community leadership role that is a bridge between these things, that is so important and so like vitally needed in these spaces, that you like when you can find someone who recognizes that there's something like this, that like the guide, like the ideas that are in the guide of like words that people are using they are not trying to other you, they are not like you establish this and it gets through to somebody, then it goes both directions. It's like, okay, I can listen to this person even though my dad would have been so done with this conversation 10 minutes ago. Like that sort of thing is really powerful in the space. And so it's happening, and it's really cool to see it like continue to spark like more growth into the communities that we are working in on this. So.
Well, cool. Thanks. I'm really looking forward to digging in. I really appreciate you guys putting it together.
Megan, I think that's kind of what your comment was getting at too, is just that there is a new generation on the horizon too, and like, there's maybe a culture around a lot of this work where it's been happening and there's momentum behind it. So it's becoming easier and easier for people to participate in these spaces and to talk. I'd love to maybe open it up to the group, if that's okay, Matt and Lewis, to kind of see what other experiences in the room with, doesn't necessarily have to be on the similar topic, but around working collaboratively to develop language and to kind of fine tune the language they're using. I know, you know, currently in this climate, a lot of us are looking at the words that we're using and trying to figure out how to speak to new audiences. And so that's a fresh topic on my mind lately, but I'd love to hear where everybody else is and any exercises you and your staff have been through around language.
It can, like, I came from a meeting. I was a couple minutes late because I was coming from the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee's North Cascades Ecosystem meeting. And there they were giving an update on the bear. Like, they're doing an interagency collaboration on bear signage in that, the guy from the Fish and Wildlife Service was very explicit, like, we are not trying to tell any of you what you should say, but it's just a set of resources you could draw from. And it was clear that they had been working, between scientists and park managers and on what they were like, on just some consistency about that. Is even that's a challenge, and those people are all on the same page about basically we're trying to minimize bad bear encounters. It's not like particularly controversial, but it's so it's just interesting. It comes up. I think the language thing is critical, and then we deal with it at all kinds of levels: big picture, like issue level, and also down at the very specific, like shared signage.
Julia, go ahead.
I think one of the things that's been really interesting that I like here in this conversation, and I'd love to dig into the report and see what you say on it too, is that finding in the Venn diagram, right? Like, so you've got the cultural will piece, you've got the landscape concept piece, but that ecosystem services piece. I'm curious on your conversations when it talked about not just the words you use, but how to match up, how those conversations help you match up values, right? So we may be coming into a conversation matched up because of a specific value, but the group that's the most active in it, it's important to, like, not just use the right words, but rack and stack the terminology correctly so that provides that connection point. And I wondered if you had any reflections on all of these great conversations and development of this guide about, like, matching up those connection points.
I think what you're getting at is there's a Venn diagram of values where some may not overlap and some may overlap, and finding those shared values and where you can work from, and how language kind of was able to bring you in that direction. Great. Yeah. I think one it was a tool really that we kind of developed out of a bunch of conversations. It's not really in this guide, but it's used in a lot of our policy recommendations too. But it's called the 4 C's. So that's what's needed to help support producers who are managing conflicts and to keep them economically viable. And in any system, they're looking for compensation, conflict prevention, so there's tools that help prevent conflict, selective lethal control, and collaboration. And so those are what we found as the radical center. And I think using like a quick, pithy kind of mnemonic device to remember those things, and a way to stake that middle ground was something that has been really helpful for our programming going forward. And I think that a lot of the conversations that we had, a lot of listening and shared learning at the beginning kind of led into that. So that was like kind of the whole process of figuring out the Venn diagram of values. And in that, it's like there's some things in there that makes folks uncomfortable. It's like some wildlife advocates may be uncomfortable with compensation and lethal control, versus some producers may be uncomfortable with collaboration and conflict prevention, but there's space to grow into that on either side. And that's where we kind of found the edges of all those Venn diagrams where they could overlap.
And I think like the genius here is not like in the specific language in the document, or like, and actually it's not Greg's like, I'm excited to get into it, and I'm like, well, I mean, I want you to read it because or look through it, but it's not like a brilliant piece of prose that explains like how to use words for conflict reduction. It's just, it was the most important was the exercise of constantly revisiting how this language and what values are embedded in the words I'm using, and can we talk about those more directly, so that we're having a conversation about the thing that matters rather than an argument about the words we're using. Like that's what I think this helped us do. And we wouldn't necessarily even think about it as explicitly as that at the time, although we were conscious of the fact that like thinking about the words we use is going to be really important. But like it's proven, I think, to be that a useful reminder of that intention.
Natalie, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I was just curious, and I guess this is for both of you, but also just, everyone else. We don't do at Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, don't work directly with landowners often, but we kind of have discussions a lot about like what is the best method outside of those in-person opportunities. Like, what are the best kind of tools that you can use to contact landowners? Like, is it doing mailers? Is it doing print products? Is it through listservs? Like what kind of tools have people found success with? Or, maybe it's a little bit of everything, but I was just curious about that.
I mean, I've spent all my time thinking about this question. I don't know the answer. I wish I knew the answer. It's a great question, Natalie. Oh man. And I would love for other people on the call who have found something successful. So, I mean, it varies by geography and by user type too, quite a bit. We found like, for instance, trying to reach landowners in northern New Mexico is practically impossible on the internet. You have got to call these people or mail them something. In other places, it's we're likely to convert them from like with a post in the trade swap Facebook group for ranch and farm equipment. If you can get that past the moderators of that Facebook group, you're just it's all over the place. And so it's challenging because then it's sort of like a whack-a-mole situation, and you have to be focused to do that, and not like get exhausted. So that's my experience, at least. I'd love it if somebody else had a silver bullet they could share.
Because in my experience, it's so place-based and very specific to location, but I'm curious if anybody in here has done like a very specific landowner communications campaign that they thought really well, and what were the methods that you used. And it might be really specific to that geography and not applicable everywhere, but I'd love to hear about it. I know that at one point we had a very, very, very targeted campaign to get producers in Northeastern California to sign up for wetland reserve easements. And we had a list of 12 people we sent postcards to.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've done postcards to very specific people in like the Umpqua Valley in Oregon. But yeah, like that's just a very specific, tiny, I think like 10 people that we were reaching out to.
And so, I mean, like, I guess we're the Western Landowners Alliance, so we're trying to reach landowners constantly, and new landowners and our existing landowners, in ways that like engage them. And for instance, we have a survey right now that we're doing in partnership with this survey firm that's trying to quantify landowner investment in conservation in a more comprehensive way than just participation in agency programs, which that data is available publicly. And so we have taken like a very all hands on deck approach to this. We mailed surveys to 9,000 people from lists that we acquired around the country. So, and then we're using our email list. Those lists that we acquired had some of them had emails associated with those addresses. Extremely high bounce rates, but that's fine. You do what you can, and then and then we also are, and this is something that I think a lot of, and it's hard when you're in the agency space, especially to be able to access these tools. But we have recently been able to do more what's called programmatic digital advertising. So that's like really targeting people on the websites that they visit regularly with our key calls to action, and not just like that Google's ad network and your Google ad grant or your Google ad campaign is part of that, but it's not the entire, like there are others. And if you use tools that can do that, then
Elena, do you want to jump in?
Of course. Hi, everyone. It might not be super fair because the organization that I work with, it is very much landowner based, and all of the landowners in the geographic area that we cover are part of our board. But recently we had some workshops, and I found that it was really helpful to get new people to go to feed stores and put posters there. Talking with the owner made a difference because she, of course, talked to more people about it and pushed it a little more. Also, while doing my master's research, which was in a very controversial issue, it was on wild horses, my best source were people that work with extension. I know that it depends with the university, but a lot of extension people tend to have good relationships with landowners, producers, all this. And also NRCS might be another good source because, again, they work very closely with them.
Yeah,
I don't know how many of you work with conservation districts, but one of the things that we've done is here in Utah, they have a Grill Your District, which is sort of a big gathering with all of the landowners that are participating in the conservation district, and there's food. And, people are hanging out and you can give a couple-minute presentation, but it's a nice way to actually be with a bigger group of people and, create those relationships. And although it's really nice to be able to send out email blasts or postcards, and we've tried all of that too, it seems like if we're in a place with them and we can talk with them and ask them questions, and usually we have something specific we'd like to know from them, like, where are you having issues? What kind of problems are you having with your land? Let's talk about this, and let's see if we can find money. Money's always, good. So food and money are the two things that we seem to find the most success with. Is we have non-point source funding we can help you with. Where are you having issues? Let's chat about them, and give us your contact information. We'll come out and visit your property and see what we can do to help. And that's been really useful.
Christine, those Girl Your District events I know have been really, really key for our capacity positions in Utah to determine like the types of strategic funding pools they're doing for projects and just like actually enact conservation based on what they're hearing at those meetings. So events like that are super important.
Yeah, and they're already doing them, so we just show up, which is super nice.
Yeah, I will say as a member of a rural volunteer fire department, if you have any type of work related to fuels and fire, it's a great venue. Show up at the volunteer fire department meeting. But again, it's like such a local scale, and it's going to vary place to place. If you're doing a larger, like at the IWJV, we struggle with those kind of region-wide or even statewide campaigns because it varies so much. Any other questions for Matt and Lewis today? Thanks for dropping Calvin and Hobbes in the chat. That's awesome.
I just got lost in that. It's awesome.